Okay, let's unpack this. Imagine a future where the maps look entirely different. I mean, where the very idea of a nation state, the countries we see today, has just faded into history.
Yeah, completely gone.
What monumental force could possibly bring about such a shift? It sounds like something pulled straight from, I don't know, the most imaginative science fiction, doesn't it?
It really does. It feels very out there.
But what if the genesis of that future isn't some, cataclysmic event or an alien invasion, but something far more subtle? A quiet force we might not even recognize as a weapon, yet one that reshapes the very foundations of, well, how humans organize themselves.
That's something hidden in plain sight almost.
Exactly. Today, we're embarking on a deep dive into a truly fascinating, almost prescient document. It's presented as a historian's notes from a potential future.
Right, like looking back from maybe 100 years from now or more.
Yeah, offering this chillingly detailed account of how the world transformed. Our mission today is to delve into a concept that historian calls demographic wars.
Demographic wars. It sounds ominous.
It does. And we're not just exploring an imagined history, we're dissecting a really radical vision of societal evolution.
And our mission, it goes beyond just understanding what happened in this imagined future, right?
Right.
Crucially, we're here to uncover the underlying why. To understand the surprising, almost counterintuitive logic behind a world where physical conflict, as we've known it for millennia, has become largely obsolete.
Obsolete, imagine that.
It's about pulling back the curtain on the often overlooked systemic forces that can reshape civilizations from the inside out, not through big, overt confrontations.
More subtle.
Much more subtle, yeah.
Our primary guide for this extraordinary journey is a document titled A Frail But Possible Future.pdf. Intriguingly, in our present reality, it was published back on October 3, 2016.
Yeah, so it's been around for a bit, which makes its ideas even more, interesting to look at now.
It offers us excerpts from this future historian's perspective, giving us this unique window into what they describe as a pivotal moment in human history, a real paradigm shift.
We are indeed treating this historical account from a potential future as our compass. It's more than just a thought experiment, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely.
It's a profound lens through which to examine the dynamics of societal transformation. We'll be extracting its core insights on how populations, technology, and identity converged to redefine power.
It really compels us to question our current assumptions, doesn't it, about conflict, control, and what truly drives global change.
Definitely.
So, let's jump right into the source's central revelation, and it's a profound one. This future historian asserts that the end of nation-states, these bedrock structures of our modern world, occurred during a period they simply refer to as the demographic wars.
Right. That phrase immediately conjures images of conflict, doesn't it?
It really does. But it's not what you'd typically expect. How does the historian define these wars, and what makes them so distinct from, traditional warfare?
That's the critical first distinction we need to make clear for you, the listener. The historian is incredibly explicit about this. Look, these were not wars fought by armies with lethal weapons. We're talking about a complete departure from the conventional battlefield.
So, no tanks rolling across borders, no fighter jets.
None of that. No infantry assaults. This isn't a story of military might in the way we usually understand it. It's a story of a far more subtle yet ultimately more devastating form of societal erosion.
Societal erosion.
Wow. So if they weren't fought with conventional arms, what were they? The source describes them as wars orchestrated through the skillful use of demographic fluctuations to destabilize national units and power structures.
Yeah, that's a truly radical concept, isn't it?
It is. Instead of bombs, they used birth rates. Instead of tanks, they manipulated migration patterns. Can you give us a more concrete sense of how a demographic war might practically destabilize a nation? Like, what would those fluctuations look like in practice?
Well, the historian implies a sophisticated, almost unseen manipulation. Imagine, for instance, sustained large-scale population movements.
Yeah, maybe encouraged through policy or economic incentives or even covert social engineering campaigns, right? All designed to maybe overwhelm social services in a target nation.
Right, or shift political majorities.
Exactly, or create internal ethnic tensions. Or think about deliberate long-term influences on birth rates.
How would they do that?
Maybe through economic pressures that make it harder to raise families, or cultural narratives pushed through media, or perhaps even subtle technological interventions we can't even quite picture yet. The result, aging populations, labor shortages, or maybe a demographic imbalance that just fundamentally alters a nation's character and its capacity to function.
So the objective wasn't physical conquest of land.
No, not at all. It was about making the existing national structure economically unsustainable or politically fractured or socially incoherent. It's about turning a nation's internal composition into its greatest vulnerability.
And the objective of these wars, the historian notes, was surprisingly traditional, even if the methods were revolutionary. It was all about gaining control of physical, monetary, and intellectual resources.
Exactly. So while the means changed dramatically, the core human motivations for power and control, they remained constant.
It's a fascinating disconnect, isn't it, between these old ambitions and these new, unprecedented strategies?
Absolutely. The human desire for dominance over resources, for strategic advantage, that stayed put. What evolved was the understanding that direct, kinetic conflict wasn't the most effective path anymore, or maybe not even feasible.
Right.
It's a stark reminder that even in a radically transformed future, some fundamental drivers of human behavior just endure. The conflict simply shifted from overt battles over territory to these covert campaigns for societal influence.
A much quieter battlefield.
In a way, yes.
Yeah.
What's truly fascinating here is how the historian frames these demographic wars. They weren't some isolated anomaly, some sudden invention. Instead, they are presented as a natural progression from a sparsely populated and largely isolated pre-industrialized world to a populous and connected world.
Okay, so like an inevitable consequence of us getting more numerous and connected.
That's the suggestion. As humanity grew in numbers and interconnectedness, new forms of competition, new vulnerabilities, they just naturally emerged. It's a profound observation. It suggests that these huge societal shifts don't always announce themselves with a bang.
Yeah, they creep up on you.
Exactly. They often emerge incrementally from the very fabric of our progress and our increasing complexity.
And this is where it gets truly intriguing, because the historian themselves admits that why things turned into demographic wars was and still seems to be poorly understood by most people.
Right. Even with hindsight in this future.
Exactly. This sets up a central mystery, a puzzle for us to solve for you, the listener. Even in this imagined future, the simplicity of the cause, the insidious nature of this shift, was baffling to the majority. It's a stark warning about our own blind spots, maybe.
That admission is incredibly insightful, isn't it? It highlights how often we as humans, we tend to focus on the dramatic, the visible, the immediately impactful events.
We look for the explosions.
Precisely. Explosions, grand declarations of war. Meanwhile, the slower, more systemic changes like demographic shifts, changes in birth rates, patterns of migration, shifts in cultural values, they accumulate power almost unnoticed.
Until it's too late.
Until they reach a tipping point. This historian is essentially saying, look, the signs were there, the shifts were happening, but very few understood what they truly meant until it was too late to reverse course.
Wow.
It suggests that the profound forces reshaping our world aren't always the loudest or most obvious. They're often silent and insidious. It's a lesson in paying attention to the quiet forces that shape our destiny.
So this brings us to a pivotal question. Why? Why did humanity abandon millennia of physical warfare? The historian offers a chilling answer, one rooted in the ultimate, terrifying evolution of weaponry itself. The source explicitly states that one monumental reason demographic makeup became the weapon of choice was the inescapable reality of nuclear and biochemical weapons of mass destruction.
WMDs.
Yeah.
The biggest game changers in human conflict, bar none.
Absolutely. These human inventions, as the historian notes with stark clarity, decisively demonstrated that war by physical force has largely become redundant.
Think about the sheer weight of that statement.
Redundant, I know. For virtually all of recorded history, physical force was the ultimate arbiter of power, the final argument between nations.
But with weapons capable of erasing entire cities, entire nations, maybe even entire swaths of the biosphere,
Yeah.
the utility of traditional warfare for achieving any strategic objectives just vanished. It ceased to be a rational means of exerting power, or controlling resources, or subduing populations if the cost was your own and everyone else's. Total annihilation.
And central to this redundancy was a concept we're all acutely familiar with, albeit hopefully only in theory. MAD, mutually assured destruction.
Right. MAD. The idea that if you launched an attack with these weapons, you were guaranteed to be destroyed in return.
It wasn't about winning anymore, was it?
No, not at all. It was about ensuring total annihilation for everyone involved. How do you achieve power? How do you gain control when the cost of using your ultimate weapon is your own extinction.
It rendered traditional conflict meaningless for achieving power in any meaningful sense. The threat became the weapon, not the actual use of it.
Which brings us to a critical and rather sobering point highlighted by the source.
What's that?
That the moral commitment that was required to ensure the success of the non-proliferation of nuclear weapons failed.
Ah, that's worrying.
It is. This wasn't just a technical or political failure. The historian implies it was a profound societal and ethical one. The global community, despite its best intentions and numerous treaties, simply couldn't maintain the discipline, the unity, or, the shared moral conviction necessary to keep these apocalyptic weapons out of more and more hands.
It points to a deep flaw, maybe, in our collective will. And the implication of that failure is profound, isn't it? WMDs became accessible to various groups and nations regardless of their standing in the global community.
Yeah, it wasn't just the major superpowers anymore. Rogue states, emerging powers, maybe even sophisticated non-state actors could potentially get their hands on the means to unleash catastrophic destruction.
That levels the playing field, but in the most terrifying way imaginable, creating this unprecedented global vulnerability.
And what this widespread proliferation led to, in the words of the historian, was this universal realization.
Which was?
That everyone soon realized that simply the show of force cannot truly resolve conflict or subdue belligerents without the threat of total destruction.
So the old saber rattling became a hollow gesture.
Exactly. You could parade your might, invest billions in the most advanced conventional weaponry, but you couldn't use the ultimate weapons without inviting total ruin for yourself and everyone else.
So it forced a fundamental reevaluation of what power actually meant in a world saturated with WMDs.
Completely. It was like having a loaded gun pointed at your own head. You might possess the ultimate power, but you can never actually pull the trigger if it means your own demise. That renders it meaningless for practical conquest or coercion in the traditional sense.
So, okay, if direct physical conflict was off the table, if the ultimate weapons made war futile, what came next? The source describes an interim period.
Right, a messy one.
Yeah, of unnecessary proxy wars by conventional means and an era of unprecedented terrorism. It was almost as if humanity was flailing, still caught in the old patterns of violence.
Trying to find new outlets for power struggles. But these efforts were ultimately senseless, leading to immense suffering without real strategic gain.
Exactly. This was a period of painful trial and error, a desperate search for a new way to exert influence without triggering global annihilation.
And it was through this crucible, this messy period, that the realization finally dawned.
Which led back to demographics.
Yes, that the more civilized weapons to use in the face of WMDs are, in fact, the mostly covert manipulation of the makeup of population characteristics.
Wow. That's the pivot point in the historian's narrative, isn't it?
It absolutely is. If you can't conquer outright, you subtly influence from within. It's a shift from blunt force to this surgical, sociocultural precision, albeit one with devastating consequences for existing structures.
And the historian is quite specific about these characteristics, detailing them for us. Race, creed, political ideology, level of development, industrial intentions, or welfare intentions.
A whole range of societal fault lines.
So it's about leveraging internal divisions, playing on those fault lines, amplifying existing fissures to weaken a nation from within rather than attacking it from the outside. It's a truly chilling evolution of warfare.
And this is where the source offers a critical distinction. While some, the historian notes, initially lumped this strategy under the banner of a specific belief in the hegemonic nature of the Western Enlightenment liberal democratic conviction.
So like seeing it as just another way to spread Western ideas.
Kind of, yeah. Perhaps seeing it as a new form of ideological expansion. But a deeper understanding, according to the historian, revealed that human nature exposed the demographic subtleties of the real force.
Meaning
it wasn't simply about spreading an ideology or a political system. It was about harnessing much older, deeper, more inherent human identifiers and loyalties.
Oh, okay.
It suggests that deep-seated, pre-existing social structures and identities, maybe forged over millennia, were the true levers of power, not just fleeting political doctrines or economic systems. It highlights the profound influence of deep-seated human identity.
So to summarize this pivotal shift, the Ahmadi reality, created by 20th century weapons of mass destruction, it ultimately forced the hand of the world's power brokers to find entirely new means of coercion.
Mm-hmm.
It created an obsession with using demographic fluctuations to achieve the control that, in the past, was mostly assured through the show of physical force.
It's a chilling, but in the context of the source, an undeniably logical progression of conflict, isn't it?
It really seems that way, looking back through this future lens. So if this was the catalyst, how did these demographic wars actually unfold? It clearly wasn't an overnight collapse of the old order. The historian describes distinct phases, right? Almost like a grand strategic game playing out over decades.
Exactly. It was a multi-act drama, not a sudden explosion.
How did they begin?
The historian explains that at first, the demographic wars was very successful in ensuring that very little opposition existed for the liberal democratic hegemonic aspirations of the traditional powerful Western and quasi-Westernized nations.
Okay, so the West initially used these methods effectively.
That's the picture painted. The initial application of these demographic weapons, maybe through targeted migration policies, cultural soft power campaigns, economic incentives encouraging specific population shifts, it was, from their perspective, incredibly effective.
They seemingly achieved global reach without firing a single shot.
Right. And this initial success was directly connected to their globalization strategies, wasn't it?
That's what the source implies.
It suggests that the very processes of global integration, while seemingly benign and maybe designed for economic growth, could be leveraged as a tool in these demographic conflicts.
How so?
Well, perhaps by encouraging certain population flows that benefited them, or influencing cultural assimilation in certain ways, or even just exploiting existing economic disparities to create demographic shifts that suited their agenda.
It's an insidious thought. The tools of connection becoming instruments of control.
Precisely. Globalization, intended perhaps to flatten the world, inadvertently created new vectors for demographic influence. But as is often the case with powerful new methods, a reaction was inevitable.
Ah, the counteroffensive.
Exactly, the historian tells us. But then the counteroffensive happened. This wasn't a static conflict. The targets adapted, they learned from their vulnerabilities, and new strategies emerged to challenge the initial demographic aggressors.
It's a testament to human ingenuity, I suppose, even in the face of such a novel form of conflict.
You could say that. And this counteroffensive, the source says, aimed at the very heart of the national unity of the old powerful nations.
So it turned the tables completely.
It did. The same demographic vulnerabilities that had been exploited by these powers initially were now weaponized against them.
It's a classic case of the weapon being turned on its creator, isn't it? The very strategies they had deployed against others were now deployed against their own internal cohesion.
Indeed. And the method remained consistent, reinforcing the core concept. Again, it was the use of demographic fluctuations that successfully destabilized these old and diminishing powerful nations.
So it just kept escalating.
It underscores the universality of this new form of warfare. Once this Pandora's box of demographic manipulation was opened, its tools became universally applicable, irrespective of who wielded them or what their geopolitical standing had been in the past. It suggests a certain brutal symmetry in this new world order of conflict.
Which leads us, then, to the final, inevitable stage the historian describes as the last offensive, which ultimately led to, quote, the total collapse of the traditional nation-states. This wasn't just a weakening or a reordering. It was a complete dismantling.
Yeah, dismantling of the political and geographical boundaries we currently understand. The very concept of a centralized, sovereign state defined by fixed borders and a unified national identity, it simply ceased to exist according to this account.
But it didn't collapse into just chaos.
Apparently not, which might be our first assumption. Instead, the collapse was in favor of small community or ethnic units formed around various enduring and unifying interests.
Okay, that's a profound and perhaps surprising outcome.
It really is.
Yeah.
Instead of larger, more abstract national identities that had often been, let's face it, artificially constructed over centuries, humanity gravitated towards more fundamental organic groupings. This speaks to a deeper human need for belonging based on more inherent shared characteristics. It's almost a de-evolution, a return to earlier forms of social organization, but enabled by cutting-edge technology.
During this final phase, there was a critical, almost desperate shift in focus. The historian mentions the utilization of what little national power was left in a globalized world to meet the challenges posed by dangerously large, superstructured, monolithic, ideologically defined nations.
Right. This implies a last-ditch effort by what remained of the old order, or perhaps new, nascent powers, to prevent an even larger, more oppressive new structure from forming.
Like trying to stop the next empire before it even got started?
Kind of. It was a race against the formation of new, even more centralized threats. The historian suggests that even as nation-states crumbled, there was still the danger of new monolithic entities emerging, perhaps fueled by a single powerful ideology, or just the desire to dominate the post-nation-state landscape.
So the weapons had to adapt again.
Exactly. To prevent this, the demographic weaponry had to rapidly adapt and improve. It became even more sophisticated, more precise, designed to counteract these emerging superstructures.
And at the same time,
Simultaneously, and this is key, the historian points out how dispersed national units quickly and almost organically regrouped into community groups. This wasn't a top-down mandate. It was an inherent human tendency to coalesce around shared identities when larger structures failed.
so people naturally formed these smaller groups.
It seems so. And these new entities were able to mobilize in ways that no mechanistic or ideological supernation could compete with. It highlights their agility, their organic adaptability, as a key strength that ultimately won out against the more rigid, top-heavy structures.
What's truly fascinating here is how the source describes the glue that held these new units together, especially after the complete collapse of the nation-state. What allowed them to coalesce into functional, thriving entities instead of just descending into anarchy?
This is a crucial, perhaps counterintuitive insight into human nature, isn't it?
It feels like it.
The historian explains that these post-nation-state and post-universal ideology entities were only able to successfully form into powerful acting units because of the natural gravitation towards the most fundamental, most permanent characteristics by which individuals naturally identified themselves.
Okay, that's a powerful statement about identity. When the grand, often artificial ideologies and political boundaries broke down, people returned to something deeper, something innate.
That's the idea. And the surprising answer to what that unifying force turned out to be.
Yeah.
They're ancient characters formed by their pre-industrial civilizational character.
Wow. Ancient characters, pre-industrial. That's a huge revelation.
It really is. It suggests a profound reprioritization of identity. We're talking about a return to identities rooted in deep history, shared cultural narratives, perhaps common ancestries, maybe even primal survival
Are
instincts.
things that go way back.
Way back. Rather than modern political constructs or fleeting economic allegiances, it's almost as if the societal bedrock, the really deep stuff, reasserted itself.
So beneath the layers of modern national identity and these big universal ideologies, there existed more fundamental, enduring identities that, when activated by the breakdown of the old order, became incredibly powerful unifying forces.
That's the implication. This could manifest as renewed loyalty to a shared language, specific cultural practices, historical lineage, or deeply ingrained collective memories that predate the modern nation-state by centuries, if not millennia.
So people connecting on a more visceral, inherent level.
Right. Rather than an abstract, politically defined one, it suggests a rejection of manufactured identities in favor of something more authentic and deeply felt.
So these new entities weren't just smaller versions of the old nation-states then. The structure was fundamentally different.
Completely.
Instead of having a centrally organized structure with clear, fixed geographical boundaries like we have now, how did they function? How did they manage to coordinate, especially on a global scale?
The historian details a radically different system. The new post-nation-state entities, organized through collaborative decision-making, utilizing advanced data manipulation and analysis tools.
Okay, so highly technological but decentralized.
Exactly. This isn't a return to primitive tribalism. It's a highly sophisticated form of distributed governance. Imagine AI-driven networks that can predict resource needs across dispersed communities.
Whoa.
Track individual preferences for services, and instantly reallocate resources or personnel across these decentralized units. This isn't just big data, it's orchestrating an entire society through real-time feedback loops.
Moving beyond rigid hierarchies and bureaucratic delays.
That's the idea. It's a fascinating blend of ancient identity and cutting-edge technology, where technology facilitates rather than dictates organic human interaction.
And the agility that resulted is key, isn't it? These new groups were able to mobilize in ways that no mechanistic or ideological supernation could compete with.
Yes, that speaks to the inherent power of organic, self-organizing systems over rigid bureaucratic ones. They could adapt, shift, and respond much faster to challenges. precisely because their structures were fluid and their unifying principles were so deeply ingrained.
And there was another crucial benefit mentioned, wasn't there? Something about class wars.
Yes, a truly crucial benefit of this new structure, according to the historian, is that the post-nation-state world managed to stave off a series of class wars.
That's significant. That could easily have been the next big conflict after nation-states fell.
Absolutely. It points to a successful resolution of one of humanity's most persistent internal conflicts, especially after the breakdown of traditional governing structures.
And the mechanism for averting these class wars was equally important. Through the ability to successfully manage and optimize the flux of transactions and agreements between individuals and community or ethnic units of various types and classes.
So it wasn't about eliminating difference or forcing everyone into a single mold. It was about building systems likely powered by that advanced ICT that could facilitate fluid, fair, and mutually beneficial interactions across incredibly diverse groups.
Like a dynamic equilibrium, a constant dance of negotiation and agreement.
Precisely, rather than enforced uniformity or rigid social stratification. And this agile and cooperative state of affairs, fortunately, became part of the globalized sense of community and belonging, according to the historian.
So a new kind of global cohesion emerged.
It seems so. A profound shift from a fragmented, conflict-ridden past to a more integrated, albeit differently structured, global society. It implies that from the ashes of the nation-state, a new, more resilient form of global cohesion emerged.
Not just a truce, but genuine acceptance.
That's the suggestion. A genuine acceptance of diversity within a shared global framework. And this, the historian adds, was a direct reaction to the ideological disruptions caused by older versions of demographic weaponry.
Interesting. So the chaos actually led to something more stable.
In a way, yes. It suggests that the very chaos of the demographic wars eventually led to a more robust cooperative system where difference was managed, not suppressed.
Okay, connecting this to the bigger picture then. How did this new world, emerging from such tumultuous times, manage to avoid some of the traditional conflicts that have plagued humanity for centuries? Specifically, the historian mentions avoiding global resource wars. That remains a very real threat for us now.
Right. And this is where technology plays a crucial, truly positive and transformative role in this future narrative.
How so?
The historian states quite clearly that global resource wars were averted through a powerful combination of two things.
Okay.
Interconnected markets and ultimately the abundance of energy through clean technology. The interconnected markets fostered, perhaps, a global understanding of shared scarcity and mutual benefit, reducing the incentive for aggressive competition over resources.
But the energy part sounds key.
It is. Crucially, the fundamental energy problem, which has historically driven so many conflicts, was solved according to this account.
And the source highlights a very specific energy source, including new generation, not weaponizable nuclear power.
Yes. That not weaponizable aspect is incredibly significant, isn't it?
It feels huge. It means a fundamental energy solution that doesn't carry the inherent risk of proliferation or weaponization.
Exactly. This removes a massive traditional flashpoint for global conflict, allowing humanity to harness immense power without the constant shadow of its misuse.
Think about it. Throughout our history, sources of immense power, be it coal, oil, or early nuclear technology, have always been intertwined with military potential and geopolitical leverage.
Always. But if the very source of abundant energy is designed in a way that inherently removes that threat, it fundamentally alters the global power dynamic.
It's a technological breakthrough with a profound, almost revolutionary geopolitical and ethical impact.
Yeah, allowing energy to be a shared resource rather than a tool for dominance. This clean, safe, and abundant energy would have dramatically reduced the incentive for resource-driven conflicts.
Okay, this raises an important question, though, especially given our current anxieties about surveillance and control. What about information and communication technology, ICT? We often fear it could lead to more oppression, more centralized control. How did it play a role in this future, especially since it enabled that advanced data manipulation we talked about earlier?
It's a fascinating twist on our contemporary anxieties about technologies, isn't
Well,
it?
it seems like it.
The historian declares that it is now no secret that the advent of nuclear power and information and communication technology allowed for the successful transition away from nation-states, allowing for complex coexistence never before possible.
So in this future, ICT wasn't a tool of control for a monolithic state.
No, quite the opposite. It became a facilitator of liberation and complex, decentralized societal organization. It allowed for that intricate network of transactions and agreements that defined the new community-based world.
And this is key to understanding ICT's role here. Instead of information and communication technologies becoming the means to oppress the members of large nation-states.
Which is the fear now.
Exactly. The demographic wars ensured the collapse of the large ideological national units that would have been oppressed by ideologues, technocrats, or more traditional oligarchs.
So it flips the script entirely.
It does. The very forces that could have been used for unprecedented centralized control and surveillance were instead instrumental in dismantling the structures that would have exerted that control.
The technology became an accelerant for decentralization rather than centralization. So in essence, what could have been the worst oppression of human dignity became the very systems that ensured the successful management of the enormous flux of transactions between individuals and all community groups of various classes.
Wow. It's a powerful argument for how technology's application is determined by the societal context it operates within.
It seems so. In this future, because the large oppressive nation-states collapsed, ICT wasn't co-opted for surveillance or top-down control. Instead, it empowered a decentralized, fluid existence,
enabling countless individual and group interactions,
facilitating cooperation, and ensuring fair resource distribution across the new community units. It became the backbone of a truly collaborative society.
The historian really hammers this home, concluding that what would have been impossible without modern communication and information systems became the victory of organically organized and aligned community-based societies.
It underlines the symbiotic relationship, doesn't it, between advanced technology and this new decentralized social structure. Without that tech, the organic model of diverse interacting communities probably couldn't have scaled or functioned.
It would have collapsed under its own weight without the robust digital infrastructure to support it.
And building on that theme of organic emergence, the historian notes something else quite telling.
Oh, yeah?
That the first ideas and preparation of these community or ethnic units were already clear for many observant people to identify, even during the early stages of the demographic wars.
Okay, so this wasn't an entirely new, sudden invention in the aftermath of the collapse.
Apparently not. Instead, it suggests that there was a latent human tendency, maybe a deep-seated preference for these structures, simmering beneath the surface of the nation-state model.
Just waiting for the right conditions to emerge.
Exactly, like it was a natural evolution, rather than a forced revolution.
This truly suggests a deep-seated, almost innate human tendency towards these more fundamental, organic structures, perhaps a natural counter-response to the rigid, sometimes artificial constructs of nation-states?
It wasn't a complete break from human history, but maybe a reemergence of older, more fundamental forms of social organization, now amplified and enabled by advanced technology.
It's like humanity rediscovered its tribal roots, maybe, but with a global digital nervous system.
That's a good way to put it.
Yeah.
And a final eloquent note from the historian ties everything together beautifully. They observed that most technologies and philosophical advances during this time also converged on methods able to sustainably exploit basic resources and nurture shared knowledge.
Okay, so a fundamental reorientation of science, tech, and even thinking itself.
Yeah, it indicates it wasn't just about survival or accumulation of power anymore. It was about supporting this new, decentralized, and resource-conscious way of life.
Innovation became geared towards sustainable living and the free flow of information for the collective good.
That's the picture painted. Not primarily for profit or dominance. It truly reflects a shift in core human values, according to this account.
Which in turn helped produce products and opportunities for any size of organically or naturally formed cooperations.
Right. So the economic and productive systems also adapted to serve these new fluid community structures. This allowed for, localized innovation, decentralized commerce, direct exchange.
Without the need for large, centralized industrial complexes or multinational corporations.
Perhaps fostering a vibrant, distributed economy tailored to the needs of the communities, rather than the dictates of a centralized market. The end result, as the historian describes, is an almost organic system of community or ethnic units, and the birth of a new inclusive sense of humanity that was ultimately celebrated.
So not a perfect utopia, maybe, but a successful, resilient model.
A model of coexistence forged through profound, challenging change. It's a humanity that found a way to thrive in diversity. These societies, the historian says, are made up of various community or ethnic units transacting as individuals and groups.
It highlights a constant fluidity, doesn't it? A continuous negotiation and interaction rather than static, isolated entities.
Yes, it's about dynamic connection, constant adaptation, and mutual respect, not rigid separation or forced assimilation. It's an ongoing, living system.
And perhaps most profoundly.
Yes, perhaps most profoundly, these groups were cognizant of each other's contributions and challenges to the beauty and dangers of our shared existence in our collectively cherished biosphere and the resourceful universe.
Well, that's quite a vision.
It is. It's a vision of a humanity that has achieved a profound state of self-awareness and interdependence. They're not just aware of their own community's needs, but also of their collective responsibility to the entire planet and their place within the vastness of the cosmos.
A state of profound ecological and cosmic awareness that defines this new future. A truly inclusive sense of shared destiny. Wow. What an incredible and at times pretty unsettling journey we've taken today, peering into this frail but possible future.
Definitely frail, possibly unsettling.
We've explored how the sheer impossibility of conventional war brought about by the terror of WMDs ironically led to this radical shift in conflict.
Giving rise to the quiet, insidious power of demographic manipulation.
Right. And we saw how this, in turn, fueled the eventual, seemingly unimaginable collapse of traditional nation-states, paving the way for the emergence of these agile, community-based units built on deeper ancient characters.
And the surprising insights truly don't stop there, do they? We learned how Man-D, the threat of total destruction, didn't end humanity, but instead forced a painful yet ultimately transformative shift towards less physically destructive forms of power.
And how ICT, information and communication technology, so often feared as a tool for oppression,
became a vital instrument for liberation and complex, decentralized coexistence in this telling.
And how, perhaps most unexpectedly, humanity returned to its ancient characters, its fundamental pre-industrial civilizational identities as the most potent unifying force, moving beyond modern ideologies to forge a new, more organic form of global community.
It's quite a narrative arc.
It really is. So what does this all mean for us here and now as we navigate our own complex, interconnected world? This deep dive into a frail but possible future offers a stark reminder, I think, that the forces that truly shape our destiny aren't always the loudest or most visible.
It makes you wonder, doesn't it? What demographic fluctuations are silently shifting the ground beneath our feet right now?
Yeah.
What ancient characters are subtly re-emerging in our own societies, perhaps driving unexpected loyalties or conflicts that we don't fully grasp yet?
Are we, too, overlooking the quiet shifts?
The systemic changes?
Yeah.
The ones that could be charting a completely new course for humanity, far more profound than the daily headlines might suggest?
A truly thought-provoking question, isn't it? We encourage you, the listener, to reflect on these concepts, to perhaps observe your own world through this fascinating, if speculative, new lens.
Yeah, consider the quiet, powerful forces that may already be at play, shaping the maps of tomorrow in ways we haven't quite realized.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive.